In this video, we'll talk about how to create truth tables involving conditional and biconditional statements. So we'll start with conditional, which for most people is the most complicated type of statement to work with. So a conditional statement is written like this, and it means if P, then Q. So I'll make my truth table headings, and my P values are true and false. We do 2 of each. Q is also true or false, and we alternate. Now with a conditional statement, there is only one way for a conditional statement to be false. So if we have if true, then false, that is going to be false. That is the only false within this particular type of statement. Everything else is true. Truth leads to truth. That makes sense. Anything false could lead to anything. It could lead to truth, or it could lead to something that's false. So the only bad thing is when something true is leading to something false, and so that's false. So what I make a note of is I say, if true, then false equals false, and all else is going to be true. Now with biconditional, this is really a conditional going both ways. So it means if P then Q and if Q then P. So we write this as P if and only if Q. And when I make my truth table, what we're going to see is that if the truth values match, if P and Q have the same truth value, that's when you say that the statement P if and only if Q is true. And if they don't match, then we get false. So true if and only if true is true. True if and only if false is false, because we have 1 of each. They don't match. False if and only if true is false. And false if and only if false is true. So this is the only way we have 2 falses making it true. So if they match, that's true. Don't match, that is false. Okay, so now let's take a look at how we would create a truth table for a more complicated statement. So here I have the statement P or not Q. So if P or not Q, then P. So I'll start with my P and my Q. And since there's only 2 variables, it's going to be true, true, false, false, true, false, true, false. Then I look inside my parentheses and I have a not Q. So I'm going to make a column for that. So if I label my first 2 columns 1 and 2, then now I'm doing the negation of column 2, and that makes column 3. So I'm just doing the opposite of the Q column, and I get false, true, false, true. So now we can do this whole expression inside the parentheses, and I have P or not Q. And so that is column 1 or column 3. And that makes column 4. And so we are using or, and with or, we have false or false is false, all else is true. So if I combine 1 and 3, I'm looking for there to be 2 falses, and that's in the 3rd row, and everything else has some kind of true in it. So that's going to be true for those other 3 rows. And now I'm ready to do the whole expression, and I have if P or not Q, then P. And so this is if column 4, then column 1. And this is where you have to be really careful. With all the other types of logic statements, the order is not important, but it is with conditional. So I have to look at column 4 being the first part and column 1 being the second part. So here we have, for the first row, we have if true, then true, because I'm looking here first and then here. Let me do this, 1 and 2, and I get true. If true, then true is true. For the next one, same deal. If true, then true, so we'll get true again. Next, I have if false, then false. And so that will be true. And finally, we have if true, then false. And that would be false, because we know if true, then false is false, all else is true. And so our final result is true, 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 false for this problem. And now let's take a look at an expression involving biconditional. Okay, now I have 3 variables. So my statement is if P, then not Q, if and only if Q or R. So that's a lot. You just want to look at it step by step. So I have my variables P, Q, and R, and I'm going to fill in those truth values real quick. Okay, so now I've filled in my trues and falses, and I put a little line in there just to help keep everything in alignment. So I have my P, Q, and R. I'm going to look at the first set of parentheses, and I have a not Q in there. So I'm going to label my first 3 columns as 1, 2, and 3. And now we're negating column 2, and this makes column 4. And again, you don't have to label these. That's something that I do just so that I can keep track of what I'm doing. So I just want to do the opposite of column 2, and we had true, true, false, false. So now it'll be false, false, true, true, and then again, false, false, true, true. Next, I'll look at this whole expression, if P, then not Q. So that starts with column 1. If column 1, then column 4. And remember that with our conditional, if true then false is false, all else is true. So we start off with if true then false. So that's going to be false. And then we have another if true then false. So that would also be false. Then we have if true then true. That's going to be true for both of those. Now the rest of them start with false. And so because this is conditional, I know that those are all going to turn out to be true because false can lead to anything. So that's all true there. So this was column 5. And now we're ready to create our next column, which is Q or R. So this is column 2 or column 3. And you don't necessarily have to go in this particular order. I try to go from left to right as much as possible. This is making column 6. And we're working with or, so we know false or false is false, all else is true. So let's see. We have true and true. That's going to be true, true and false, false and true. And then finally we get a false and a false, and that is false. And then when I look at the next group, that's going to be, again, true, 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 false. Okay. So now we're ready to do the whole thing. If P, then not Q. If and only if. Q or R. So we are taking column 5, if and only if, column 6. So why I like doing this labeling, is because then I know I'm only looking at that particular type of statement here. I don't have to think about the rules for negation or disjunction or conjunction. So because it's biconditional, if they match, that's true. Don't match, that's going to be false. Okay. So we start off with false if and only if true. That's going to be false. They don't match. Again, false, true, don't match. And then we have true, true, which match. And then true, false, and those don't match. Then for the next group, we have true, true 3 times. So that's all going to be true. And then we have true, false, and that is not going to match. So that will be false. And so this is my final answer column. And when you're doing the homework or my math lab assignment, you may see that they skip some of the columns because they don't want to have you filling in so many true and false answers. And so they may ask you just to skip to the end. But what I would recommend is to write it out on a piece of paper. It's much easier than trying to do everything in your head. So that's how conditional and biconditional work. And that's that.